The year is 1865. For 4 long years, the United States has been embroiled in a brutal civil war. Brother fought against brother, North against South, over the issue of slavery and the future of the Union. The Confederate States of America, led by President Jefferson Davis, had seceded from the Union in 1861. Their goal was to preserve their way of life, a way of life deeply intertwined with the institution of slavery. The Confederacy fought fiercely, but the Union's superior resources and manpower began to take their toll. By 1865, the Confederacy was on its last legs. Their armies were depleted, their resources exhausted. The capital city of Richmond, Virginia, was under siege by Union forces. The end, it seemed, was near. The Confederate cause, once full of hope and defiance, was now one of desperation. For many Southerners, the dream of an independent Confederacy was fading, replaced by the grim reality of defeat. As the spring of 1865 arrived, the situation for the Confederacy grew increasingly dire. Union General Ulysses S. Grant had been relentlessly pursuing Confederate General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. Lee's army, once the pride of the Confederacy, was now a shadow of its former self. Outnumbered and outgunned, they were forced into a series of desperate retreats. The once proud Confederate soldiers were weary, hungry, and demoralized. On April 2, 1865, Confederate forces were forced to evacuate Richmond. The fall of the Confederate capital was a devastating blow, both symbolically and strategically. Lee's army, now in full retreat, sought to escape to the south. Grant, sensing the end was near, pursued Lee relentlessly. The Union Army, reinvigorated by their victories, was determined to bring the war to a close. The two armies, locked in a deadly game of cat and mouse, raced across the Virginia countryside. Finally, on April 9, 1865, Lee realized the futility of further resistance. He sent a message to Grant, requesting a meeting to discuss terms of surrender. General Robert E. Lee was a complex and tragic figure. A brilliant military strategist and a man of deep personal honor, Lee had led the Confederacy with skill and determination. He was loved by his men, who admired his courage and his gentlemanly demeanor. General Ulysses S. Grant, Lee's adversary, was a man of simpler origins. A West Point graduate, Grant had been a successful businessman before the war. He was a tenacious and resourceful commander, known for his unwavering determination to win. The two men, so different in background and temperament, were now bound together by fate. They were the key figures in this pivotal moment in American history, and the weight of the nation's future rested on their shoulders. On that April morning in 1865, they met as enemies, but also as fellow soldiers who understood the terrible cost of war. The scene was both somber and hopeful. Somber because of the war's devastation, yet hopeful for the promise of peace. The meeting between Lee and Grant took place in Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. Lee arrived in full dress uniform, while Grant wore a simple soldier's uniform. Grant offered Lee generous terms of surrender. Confederate soldiers could return home. Grant promised no reprisals, no mass trials for treason. Lee accepted the terms, deeply moved by Grant's magnanimity. The terms were an act of reconciliation, a gesture of healing. The Confederate surrender at Appomattox was a turning point in American history. It marked the end of a bloody conflict that claimed over 600,000 lives. The Union was preserved and slavery was abolished. However, the legacy of Appomattox is complex. Healing and reconciliation would prove long and difficult. The South faced the daunting task of integrating former slaves into society. Appomattox was not a perfect peace, but it was a beginning. It offered hope that a divided nation could find a path to unity and reconciliation.